Hello and welcome to the Right Mind podcast, brought to you by the Institute of European Rights. I'm your host, Teodoras Žukas, and I'll be guiding today's conversation. It is my pleasure to introduce our today's guest, Peter Hefele, Policy Director at the Wilfried Martens Center for European Studies. Welcome, Peter.
Teodoras, it's a great pleasure to hear, and I'm very happy to share some European views on the topics.
Yes, thank you, Peter. Peter Hefele is an economist and the political scientist. He has an wide experience on the analysis on the economy, energy, and other issues. But our main focus on today's conversation will be the focus on the state of the European economy and various nuances and aspects of it. So I would like to begin by asking, how would you assess the current macroeconomic state of the EU? Over the past 5 years, the EU has faced two major shocks, COVID-19 and Russia's war against Ukraine. In your view, has the EU been able to navigate these crises effectively, economically, making the right policy decisions?
Well, we should not only look to the last two crises since 28. For example, we have a series of what we call polycrises, and none of them, the reasons behind of them are really solved. So Europe is facing old and new challenges, and most of them are structurally. That means it's not an issue of up and downs. There's a long-term trends which we have to address. And of course, the main issue is that we have a low growth perspective. Productivity in Europe is way behind other regions, and that is the basis of many issues. One of the reasons is definitely that the very famous steam engine Germany as the main European economy is way below its performance. And unless you don't solve this, many other national economies will be affected. Others, small economies in Central and Eastern Europe, are doing quite well, but they cannot overcome the weaknesses in the heart of Europe, and it's Germany and France to a large extent. If you look into the measures Europe has taken, well, we have a lot of programs, recovery funds, special issues. Now it's the big issue of competitiveness. We have read the reports of Draghi and Letta. Well, they precisely identify the reasons. The policy instruments proposed, I do not always share because they are very much focused on investment. I think there are other issues which are much more to be put into focus. And you must understand that Europe is undergoing a major transition. This is not only the Green Deal we have discussed in 2019, it's a long-term strategy, and it makes, sadly, I must say, the EU very vulnerable in this transition because we have lost and we give up old things, but we have not been able to step into the full potential of a new economy. And the diversification, which is often mentioned, not to be too dependent, be it from Russia, be it from China, we have not made significant challenges and progress. So there's a lot of work to be done.
You mentioned Germany, of course, and there has been recently significant discussions about the structural problems in the German economy, ranging from the underinvestment into infrastructure to the technological stagnation or backwardness, even the term is being used. There were new books written about the state of the German economy, one of which was Kaput, the end of German miracle, which is a really terrifying account of what is awaiting German's economy. So, Peter, do you believe that indeed Germany faces serious structural challenges, economic challenges? If so, do you think the current government recognizes these challenges and these issues and has enough political will to address them?
Well, I think we are facing the most severe crisis ever since the post-war times. It is different from what we have challenged, for example, in the 1970s. These had been external shocks, but what we are seeing now is the very basis, the very fundaments of the success of the former miracle of the German economy. And these are structural issues I already mentioned. They are in some ways similar to the European situation. And again, we know them for many years, for more than 15 years, and it is not about just infrastructure, and many people think of the hard part of the infrastructure. I look more into the soft parts, which includes regulatory frameworks, education issues, skills. These are, for me, the major challenges we have. Look to digitalization. I remember very well when in the second legislation of Chancellor Merkel, we had a Secretary of State for Digitalization who was announced to go cross-sectoral. That means digitalization is not something you can put in one silo. It affects all different issues. We haven't seen much results. Now there's a new promise to put it more prominently. We lost 15 years of innovation. And, that is not an issue just in the state's administration. We are very far behind, are fully digitalized, and we look with some pride on the success you have made in the Baltics, for example, on that topic. We are lacking far behind. There's a lot of unexploited productivity potential. But other things, look into the small and medium-sized enterprises. If you look into the numbers, how many of them have or are actively using modern technology and AI is just the next step. It's ashamingly and appallingly low. So there's a lot of untapped potential in productivity gains. This is the real challenge for us. And you might be surprised if I'm not focusing only on technology or the traditional factors. My biggest concern is demographic development, because we are in a rapidly aging society. On the other side, if you look into the results of the education system, we face a structural challenge, and we will see the impacts of the missed opportunities only in the years to come. For me, it's people, it's skills, it's motivation, which really makes a difference. It's not technology in first hindsight. I don't want to paint a too negative picture on Germany. We have outstanding research. We have clusters, regional economic clusters, which are world-class. And these are the points we have to build upon. If you look now into what we have already seen from the coalition negotiations and the drafts, I see, and I'm a bit critical upon that, too much of the same, too much of continuity. I think as correct as these points are, they are not the real move, the big jump ahead into new issues. That's sad, because voters have expected dramatic change after the bad performance of the last governments. But there's too much of compromise, too much of, I think, muddling through again, instead of giving a clear sign, this is a new era and we have to act accordingly.
In fact, we're talking now at this moment on April 4th, in the period where the coalition negotiations are undergoing in their most intensive phase, I would say. Looking at one sort of a case study, as they say, in the German economy and the Germany's automotive sector, right? It is, I think you would agree, it is currently losing ground to Chinese manufacturers. One case of a number: in 2005, Germany and China each produced 5 million cars per year. By 2023, Germany's output has declined to 4 million, whereas China's surged to 30 million. Do you see a path for Germany to regain its sort of a global dominance that it used to have in the automotive sector and industry, or would you say that this shift that we already witnessed is already and irreversible?
Well, I think it's too early to sound the knell of the German automotive industry. They have a lot of very innovative products in the pipe, and we see what will the market show us. But the success is far from given, that is for sure, because indeed the global dominance of German car manufacturers is gone. This per se is not the end of the world. We are still very competitive and have a lot of markets, but yes, we have to acknowledge new competitors, and it's not only China, but it's the main important one, are not only at the gate, they are already inside, and they're building up also huge capacities in Europe, also to avoid, of course, sanctions. Now there's a debate to what extent the European Union, in this case, should raise anti-dumping measures to at least secure the survival of the European car manufacturing. I think this is only a very short-term cure at all. If you're not able to produce and to deliver high-end products, high-quality products, the markets sooner or later will decide on your fate. This is absolutely sure. What was a challenge and is still not fully solved is the creation of a stable framework in terms of regulations and incentives. Europe, of course, had implemented a lot of measures to support the failing industries, but remember the discussion on the combustion engine. Now, till the last legislation, there was a clear signal in 2035 there will be no combustion engines any longer in Europe. Now there is a moving back. We will allow probably to some extent even after 2035, but you send mixed signals to the producers. And one thing is absolutely crucial, clear expectations. How shall they set up production lines without having clear signals where the future framework will be relying on? And the other issue, of course, is the lack of infrastructure. We can be sure that electrification will be the main issue in the mobility sector. Whatever we discuss about the perspectives of combustion engine in a longer perspective, for most of the individual cars, electrification will be road ahead. I don't think that hydrogen or alternative biofuels will be a major part of future mobility, at least in cities, for example, in short distance issues. So let's assume that electrification is the way. Then you have to build up a relevant infrastructure, and this has never been developed in parallel. So this is one of the cases where we see an inconsistent policy. You have one focus, but you forget that there are many other factors which really matters for the success of the transformation. So infrastructure has to be speed up. This is an issue which I can only recommend to focus on, and also transborder. We're still in a situation in Europe where we have very fragmented markets, far from being a really single market. And what I always complain is that we focus very much on cars, for example. But for me, this is only a minor part of a larger transition in mobility. You should not reduce the challenge of the transformation to electrifying cars. This is a contribution, a part, but it's never the end of the story. So we have to think in a much larger scale on sustainable mobility. And this goes into urban development, goes into other sources. Yet, you see, the focus only on the car industry is not that what really matters if you have a wider picture on the transformation I spoke before.
Just staying for a while on the energy issue, which is absolutely crucial, of course, and especially for the car manufacturers and both all the automotive industry, both in manufacturing cars and in using daily, especially of all those EVs. And of course, talking about Germany, Germany, as we perfectly know, was very experienced a tremendous shock after 2022 in terms of gas prices, in terms of a breakdown on Russian imports. How would you assess the current state of German energy policy and all the environment? There are very preliminary talks on the part of CDU people who are openly considering the re-implementation of nuclear energy projects. There are, of course, at least several new LNG terminals being built now, starting from Wilhelmshaven to the other ports in northern Germany. So how would you assess the potential of Germany in the energy sector?
Well, the focus remains on fostering renewable energies, but we're well aware that we create a lot of instability in our system unless there is a major progress in storage technology, which we will not see before the next decade. Technology-wise, we have made big advances, but not on a large scale. This remains an issue. The second is the infrastructure I mentioned. We have not been able to really balance this very volatile supply and demand. This comes in parallel with a fully digitalization of the energy system. There we have also a weak point, and of course a better connecting with our neighbors. We have not yet reached the level of a European energy union. It's still a very fragmented part. Referring to your question on the future of nuclear energy, there is now, as far as we know, a clause in the coalition treaty that they consider. I think this is a discussion which we can avoid because there will be no revival of nuclear power in Germany. The industry has clearly indicated they are not willing to go through this debate again, and I doubt whether there is a majority of the Germans really supporting. In general, they say, yes, it should be a part of our energy system, but consider the reopening or even the building of new power plant, there would be a huge opposition. So I think we should not consider this as a major part of a future German electricity.
And especially in terms of political environment, right? You wouldn't think that there would be enough political consensus.
Absolutely not. And even among the population, you should not be trusting the polls who say 70% consider now that. No, it is different in other European countries, but even there, I'm not quite sure whether these ambitious projects we see all around Germany will be materialized. And if you look into the time frame, this is the end of the next decade, so it will not contribute to our immediate challenges. Even more absurd, I find the discussion of reopening Nord Stream 1 and 2, which is also part of the discussion, in particular in East Germany, as we have not learned the lessons of the last 3 years. The LNG is a transitioned energy at a high price, definitely. So we have to speed up our linkages, for example, with Northern Africa. We have to tap into own resources, and gas, for example, is available in Europe. But the main focus remains, with high costs, I must admit, on renewable energies. The phase will be much longer of transition. This is something, and I doubt whether we will be able to achieve our emission goals in 2035 or even 2050 with a zero emission. That is unfortunately the sad part of the story, that the transition takes much longer than expected.
You mentioned the better connectivity of better needed connectivity of Germany's energy links, if I may say, with European Union countries, and especially Northern Africa, of course, in terms of gas links. There is a serious consideration in Lithuania about making an undersea cable between Lithuania and northern Germany. When Lithuania will be in the period of finishing its energy island project in terms of 2 offshore wind parks that we're currently developing in the very early phase, because we'll have quite a tremendous levels of energy output, and we could be in a position to export our energy to other markets where demand is much more needed. So we'll see how it will develop, but it's indeed interesting, and I think you would agree with me that after 2022 we have this indeed a revolution of energy in terms of how in what kind of pace we need to develop our energy infrastructure in the whole EU, not only in Germany and the Baltics, but especially in Italy, experiencing tremendous problems in energy too. Okay, Peter, jumping on to the other question is the defense and the new colossal financial packages that Commission approved in the developing European Union's defense muscles, and both the financial muscles in order to make a huge leap forward in our defense capabilities. Would you agree that the recent surge that I've just described in defense sector investments across Europe, and especially in Germany, could serve as a catalyst for revitalizing the EU economy?
Well, it will, but I don't look to the numbers, frankly speaking. Whether it's 500 or 800 billion, I don't matter. I'm looking more into what kind of system are we injecting these kind of money? And that's my biggest headache, because so far we still work with old, inefficient structures. And it's completely correct that the new Commissioner for Defense, Andrés Kubilius, is focusing on the procurement and on creating a single market for defense products. This is the biggest bottleneck and the weakest point in all European efforts to become our own provider of security. We have seen that in the past, defense industrial policy was often even not national policy, national economic policy. It was regional economic policy with a lot of different interests, not unified, and the inefficiency of the current system is really mind-boggling. I always tell friends outside Europe, look, if you combine the defense budget of Europe, it is about 230 billion euro. That is the third largest probably on the world. So you have already a lot of resources available, but look into the output. So it's minor in comparison what the Chinese, for example, the United States are able to produce. So tap into these issues. And this is the biggest challenge, absolutely, because this is not European legislation, at least for the moment. They might change, and there are a lot of interesting initiatives on the table of Kubilius, but it is the national regulatory framework which prevents. And that is my biggest concern also in the case of Germany, for example, that now there are big expectations, and we will be very disappointed in a couple of years if we look into the output, unless we really have a revolution in the way we create our own procurement procedures. And bureaucracy is incredibly inert. We have seen in the past projects which failed. And by the way, if I look into the history of transnational corporations, the famous ones between France, for example, and Germany, I have my doubt this is the future way to put it. And let aside what kind of technologies we are talking about, I think that the future of big land systems or air defense issues have totally changed with the experience of the war in Ukraine. So if you have then projects which are running for 20 years, there are several revolutions happening in between. So I doubt that the current approach to pan-European projects is the right one. I pledge rather for smaller scale individual alliances. It need not to be always Germany or France or Italy as the main providers. I think there are a lot of interesting developments in smaller countries in Central and Eastern Europe. That would be a much more flexible, vivid response to the revolution on the battlefield. And again, I think that particularly the countries here in Central and Eastern Europe will have a big role. They have a lot of interesting developments of potential. It could contribute also to their reindustrialization to some extent. But this depends on, indeed, whether we have a pan-European market or not. And the obstacles are tremendous in this respect.
But if I understood you correctly, you would say that there is a lot of to be done still and yet to be in terms of national legislation.
For the moment, national legislation is prevailing. Definitely, it's still the nation state who decides on major projects. There is a big debate now in Brussels whether we should create a kind of second layer market. That means that European Union itself is a buyer of products. Then you could overcome to some extent, but the major chunk of the budget remains with the national governments, and it's their responsibility to overcome the burden and the hurdles.
But you would still, I think you would agree with me that there's there are huge defense industry companies in the EU, and especially of course in Germany, as of Rheinmetall, which is now in the process of opening a factory in Lithuania, and that we should orient ourselves to these kind of these giants of defense industry, who have muscles to have these long-term huge orders and procurements in making our defense procurements very strategic in the long run.
Well, for the moment, we do not have that contract to that extent. That's the biggest issue. They tell us every day, we are willing to scale up. We are willing to act as an integrator across Europe with a lot of different supply chains, but please give us the prognosis, the strategy for the next 10 to 15 years. That's the horizon we need. We have a time problem to some extent. We need some capabilities very fast, and I'm talking about 2 to 3 years. That is the immediate challenge to fill the gaps in our defense systems, and in your country it's more than obvious what is needed. Behind that, we need the strategic capabilities, which takes much more time to develop in space, for example, in intelligence, all these gaps which now come up when the United States withdraw their support to some extent. And I'm not talking about the nuclear dimension, which is a specific challenge. In this respect, I still believe that the United States will keep, for the time being, their nuclear umbrella across Europe, but we should be prepared for the case it will not longer be. And then this is an issue we debate with the French, with the British, and there's different options on the ground. But yes, we have to massively scale up and in parallel to develop our strategic capabilities. And that needs a different approach also in research, for example. For the moment, in Europe, research on military or dual-use issues are very much separated. It's different to the situation in the United States or in China. Some German universities explicitly forbid research on military usable. This is an issue we have to overcome. This is ridiculous. Modern technology cannot longer be divided between civil use and military use. The interesting question in this respect, are there many spillover effects from one sector to the other, not only from the military to the civilian sector, but the other way around? I hope so. That would be a great opportunity for Europe also to overcome these productivity gains we have not achieved so far.
In the last phase of our conversation, I would like to ask about the more of a political economy question about the phase of the zeitgeist that we are in now, right? So Peter, are we entering a new economic paradigm, perhaps? Old, new, where protectionism and tariffs become the new norm? Could this shift happen unintentionally, perhaps, reshaping all the global trade dynamics?
Well, I can only pledge that the European Union remains an open market, both domestically. We have not finished our big project of a unified market, and also as a beacon of an open economy globally. We should not jump on the train of protectionism and erecting new custom walls. That would fire back into Europe itself and would destroy the very successful model we had over the last times. Having that, it's not about that Europe should be defenseless and should not strike back against certain measures. But I always see some voices now pledging to get closer to China again, as if we had not learned the lessons of over-dependence in the case of Russia, it was obviously, but also on China. This is not the way ahead. We must definitely push much more efforts in our trade policy. There are a lot of opportunities we have missed in the past due to, I must say, very high ambitions in terms of trade and free trade agreements. I see tendencies in Brussels now to say, okay, let's lower the expectation, let's get back to more traditional trade agreements and let us focus on issues of environmental or social standards, which had so far been part of the free trade agreements. Let's deal with these issues in a different way, not to prevent us from concluding these issues. And you might be shocked if you look into the list of the projects currently under negotiations. It's dozens of this project. Had we realized that, we would be in a much better position now in terms of being able to explore new markets, to diversify. And what I see as another aspect is indeed linking trade policy with other fields of policy, for example, development policy. If we really run on that fatal track, I must say, of protectionism, we would create a lot of challenges in terms of our global outreach. We close our markets, we build walls. That is the most detrimental development you could see, for example, in terms of Africa. We have a huge interest in developing, in sustainable developing in other regions, but they depend on our openness, whether we get them access to our markets. That is the best way of developing countries, instead of dedicated development policy, which was not very successful in the past and need a revision anyway. But I believe that trade, economic exchange is still the most effective way to speed up economic development.
Peter, thank you for coming to our podcast.
It's a great pleasure. Thank you very much.
I would like to remind our listeners that today we have been talking with Peter Hefele, Policy Director at the Wilfried Martens Center for European Studies. I'm your host, Teodoras Žukas, and see you and next time. Thank you. Bye-bye.